Alistair McDermott, and we're broadcasting and recording live on YouTube and LinkedIn. This is the first live broadcast episode. So I'd like to thank my guest, Al McBride, for being the guinea pig for the technology and all the going live. So on this episode of the Recognized Authority, we're going to be talking all things negotiation. And Al has written a book, or is in the process of writing a book called The Psychological Edge of Negotiation for Business Owners. So, Al, welcome back to the podcast. This is actually the third time you're on the podcast, but the first time that you were a guest.
Great to be here. Good to talk to you as always.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about um, negotiation and the psychological edge. I love the title. Can you talk to me, like, what does that mean to you, the psychological edge, and why is that key in negotiation?
Oh, well, it means a few things. First of all, it came from when I was prototyping the idea. And I mentioned to a few, well, they were lawyer and corporate finance friends of mine who had kind of been interested in some of my trainings and coaching stuff. And, oh, yeah, we must get you in and this kind of thing. And when they said, oh, what are you working on now, Al? And I said, I don't know what to call it. I suppose it's the psychological edge of negotiation. And they just, right, when, get it in the calendar. How much is it? Don't care. That's what we need. So there was an instant appeal there. It was the best market testing of a prototype idea. And they did love it, which was excellent because it is that idea that even whether people have no negotiation experience or in and around their 10,000 hours, they're doing it nearly every day, there's benefit there because often the skills you create, if you know a huge amount about negotiation, you tend to be very good at it pretty naturally. Maybe you've done courses, maybe you've read books, but in my research actually it surprises me how few books on negotiation people who negotiate every day have actually tends to have read, which was quite fascinating. But anyway, if they're close to their 10,000 hours, they tend to have a few strategies that work most of the time, and they work very well. That's why it's a big part of their earning, their success, their weekly work. However, what I also find is this is what I call the nice, but sorry, this is what I call the naturals. By obvious reasons, they're quite natural at negotiation. That they have these strategies that work regularly until they don't. So some people it's 1 in 5, some people it's 1 in 10 deals where they'll have one or two different strategies they'll employ, and it'll generally be very successful for them until it isn't, and then they don't know what went wrong or how to fix it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what we've
Yeah.
found from working with them is that a lot of it's actually in this more psychological side. When we say psychological, we're talking about the cognitive side, obviously people's thinking. But we're mostly talking about a lot of the emotions underneath what's going on. And then linked to that is also being able to hopefully positively and in a very what we say values based way actually influence people's behavior in a positive way. But that's the point. Even with people with lots of negotiation experience, there's a lot of significant gaps. And when I helped those early clients and those prototypes and actually closing those gaps and being able to be more reflective to see what they were doing and then what their other options were, different ways of being. So an awful lot of these people are used to going straight to domineering or dominating, highly aggressive. They found that when they could mix in not constantly, but just into the mix, being accommodating on things that were easy to accommodate the other side on, suddenly they were building more goodwill. And this is people in litigation. This is people where they're highly hostile to each other. The parties are highly. There's a lot of hostility going on there, right? And
Yeah.
yet, as they said to me, actually, yes, but you need to make a deal. You need to make a deal that's palatable to both sides. Otherwise, you're going to court, which a lot of people know will cost them a lot more risk and it could cost an absolute fortune. So it's a very interesting environment for them actually doing those deals, actually coming to an agreement that's palatable for both sides. So that's one side, as I said, the that I work with, which is the naturals. The other
Hmm.
side of the nice but nervous. So this is often the people that I really do enjoy helping because they're often the small business owner who the contract or this deal, this agreement that they're trying to reach with a client makes a major difference to their quarter, or even their year. So it's the difference between, oh, are we on the breadline and might have to let somebody go, versus are we going on a big holiday, or are we getting a new car type of stuff, right? So there's a lot riding on the line there. And for those of you out there who know just exactly what it's like to be a business owner, where you've that skin in the game, that can be used against you, particularly by, if you're selling into larger companies, corporates,
Mm.
where the other side don't really have skin in the game. They get a nice bonus, they get a nice business review, but often it's a game to them. You're often up against the naturals. That's why they're in that job, right? So
Yeah.
I was helping people in one of the largest suppliers to the largest supermarket chain, one of the largest supermarket chains in Britain.
Hmm.
And this was the point. Even though they're a multi-million dollar business, multi-million pound business, there's always a bigger fish, right?
Yeah.
And so that they're always in that lower position. Now they mightn't feel like it, and this is some of the traits of the natural is no matter how big a fish the other side is, one of the traits of the natural is they always know the value they're bringing to the table. And so some of those traits of the natural I bring to the nice but nervous negotiator. But with both of them, and trying to build them into what I call the supernatural, so that the natural people have that extra element of being more fluid in who they are in that negotiation, how they're able to move often from domineering, but also something that's too avoidant, to accommodating, up to compromise, which has its place. But the most important one is going to collaboration. And collaboration, it's one of these buzzwords. Oh, we all want to collaborate, and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time, it doesn't happen at all. Because when you think about it, most people who are going to collaborate are actually just saying, I want to very gently and nicely convince you that what I'm saying is right, and that you say, "Oh, you're right. Let's do it your way." That's what most people think is collaboration. Essentially, let's be blunt. It's
That's
not.
cynical, Al.
Well, this is reality, and so they go, "Oh yeah, yeah, collaboration, great, yeah." This like, I want you to basically do the thing that I want to do. That's
Hmm.
influencing. That's what most people think negotiation is. In actual, or it's compromise, which means like we're both going back on what we want. We're both giving up something we want, and to make a deal that's barely tolerable. Now think
Hmm.
about it. They say, marriage is a compromise. Well, there's a huge divorce rate. And one of the reasons in relationship counseling why marriage is a compromise, and so many of them fail, is that people are looking out for, it gets down to what we're just about willing to tolerate. How many of my needs are being met versus not being met, until it flips over, and then you go, well, what's the point in continuing on in this agreement? What is a marriage but agreement, right? But think about it the same for a business relationship, internally as a partnership, or vendor to supplier, right? It's the same thing. Where how much are you going to tolerate until you say, I think we can do better, right? And again, there's a lot less at stake with business relationships, right? It's not a whole marriage, right? So, but it's
Hmm.
the same principle. Whereas when you start with the idea of real collaboration, which the definition could be, how do we both get as close to 100%, or even beyond 100% of what we want? How do we both do that? So you start with that as your primer, as your intent. And then suddenly get quite creative. First of all, you have to be clearer and more astute as to your needs in the first place. And a lot of people aren't. So
Hmm. Yeah.
so beforehand, you're doing some proper reflection as to why do we want it? Why do we want it this way? So when you look at some of the greatest negotiators in the world, what's the difference between the best and the rest? One of them is being extremely clear on where they want to get to, and extremely flexible on how we can get there.
Hmm.
So a lot of more sort of what you might call mid-range negotiators tend to hold cards close to the chest. And yeah, you don't want to give everything away, but and you're holding a lot back, and you're not even clear on why you need the thing. It's incredibly difficult for the other side to facilitate that need then, because they don't even know what it
Hmm.
is. They're guessing, right? So when you're getting into that more collaborative mindset, it's not about not protecting yourself. It's not about holding a few details back. I mean, that's necessary, but it is about the attitude of, how do we both actually get so much that this deal is insulated from potentially other people coming in and usurping it?
Hmm.
right?
So
So
let me pause you there for a minute.
sure.
Um, I just want to summarize um, some of what you've been talking about so far. Okay, so you're dividing the you're kind of categorizing people who do negotiation into two buckets of people who are naturally good at doing it,
Mm,
and typically in negotiation, like in everything else, people who are naturally good at something, they usually do it instinctively, and so they haven't broken it down into a framework, so they don't, when
exactly.
it fails for them, they don't really understand why it's failing. And I've seen
Exactly.
that in other fields as well. And then you've got the other group of people who you talk to and you help is people who are nice but nervous, and they just find negotiation difficult, right?
Yeah, and it's that if you and you can depending on the situation, you can sometimes be in both. You know, when
Hmm.
you're in your element. So one of the examples I give in the book is the natural negotiator is in doing 6 and 7 figure deals regularly, and they're in their
Hmm.
element. And think about it: if they're rolling with it, if they feel it's a game, if they like the tussle, shall we say, right? But they see it as a game to be played. That allows a
Hmm.
certain objectivity. You're fully in the game, fully present, but you're also seeing it as a game, right? That allows that slight objective, a slight
Hmm.
space for you to think and adapt and whatnot. Whereas it's nearly the difference between the challenge mindset and the fight or flight mindset. Right, so the fight or flight mindset is you're fighting for your life, right? So what happens in the fight or flight, that level of stress is that the blood drain, the oxygen blood drains away from the prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking brain, where you're planning and you're able to recall things as need be, right? Now, this doesn't have to be, 10 out of 10 like a tiger or a big snake or something, right? It can be social pressure, it can be all sorts of things
Hmm.
that just brings some of that oxygen rich blood away because it's getting ready to run or fight. But the challenge situation, the challenge stress response is fascinating. It's the difference between you being hunted, an animal hunting you, and you're fighting for your life, versus you hunting the animal. So you're fighting for your dinner, right? So
Hmm.
that's the
Yeah.
hunter mindset. That's when you're like sprinting, in a game or you're running or something. You're able to actually see things and work things out. But before in rugby, you say where you see the what is it, the red mist, where you suddenly
Hmm.
lose the plot, you lose your discipline, you lose your control. But that's what's going on. Is the natural is in the challenge mindset, seeing it as a game, as a hunter, as this is fun, essentially a challenge. It's not easy, but it's fun. Whereas the other side feels all of the stress, all of the
There's kind of
potential
like a
loss.
level of abstraction there, and they're able to kind of step back
Exactly.
and see it for what it is. I liked when you talked about, you know, being being able to understand your own needs, and then be very accommodating around
Mm,
all the other things. I think that even just thinking about that, like, what do I really need to get here? Because I think that some people approach it as a win-lose situation. One of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose, and
absolutely. And
that
again, that's
that
the
that that's
definition
really
of
not
not
helpful.
being collaborative, right?
Yeah.
Where you're not going well. Because a lot of people are sort of, let's be honest, a lot of proper negotiators who do it as a large part of their work, who are doing it on a week on week out basis. A lot of them do fall into that trap. Not all of the time by any of it. A lot of them do fall into that trap of, well, as long as I get what I want, it's nice if you do, but I don't really care.
Hmm.
Right? But you're not building any actual relationships. You're not also usually not adding anything to the deal. They're essentially like when you have a lot of these large corporations, their whole job is to squeeze margin out of their suppliers until their
Hmm.
suppliers literally go, it's not actually worth us to do this deal anymore.
Yeah.
That's not building goodwill. That's not building extra value at all. That's not adding possibility. That's not adding that extra thing other than a transaction. They're falling back into this. It's purely a transaction of what both of us can just about tolerate. That's not adding any value. That's not uncovering hidden potential, right? And it's also not insulating it for the long term,
Hmm.
Whereas when you're able to build, first of all, that rapport and trust and whatnot, people can open up that bit more of what their needs really are. And then the other side can be really quite creative about how to meet those needs, which is absolutely key toward adding that value, which also in the long term, first of all, makes deals more easier to implement. This is one of the other things. Is this a lot of, particularly modern society, a lot of the art of the deal and all this horrible stuff, right? Yes, you need to make a deal. Yes, you need to close. Closing is important, of course it is. But you have to be another thing to be wary of. And again, with big corporate stuff versus small businesses, is when you make that deal, often the deal maker doesn't have anything to do with the implementation. And so what was regular with quite a few of my clients, which is very tricky, is they do a deal with one person, and often if it goes well and they've applied some of the stuff I've been talking about, they have a good relationship, it's moving well, but they've been reduced down from the original brief, the original need. And then how it's implemented has nothing to do with the person that did the deal in the first place. And so it's not fit for purpose, so it has to be renegotiated.
Yeah.
Right, so and this is the problem. So it's when you have an implementation mindset, well, how will this actually work on purpose? And you can tell when you ask, someone, who else is actually going to be running this on your side? And if they're not included as a stakeholder, at least with their needs, at least in one meeting or a report saying we need this is what didn't work the last time, and so on, then you're setting yourself up for some difficulty down the line. And that again means that a lot of these negotiated agreements don't even last the course, or if they do, they're messy.
So what's the solution to that? I mean, is the solution there, to be negotiating with the end client as opposed to a middleman? Is that what that is, or
again, they think they're doing it because they're usually their KPIs, their objectives, how they're judged, is more so, unfortunately, on the deal than on the implementation. So you need to get people in that room, and it's also just using prospect theory, where you have to frame certain things as loss and certain things as gain, even if they are a loss. Right? So you say, look, you can negotiate, you can kick me around this room and come out with a great deal, which will fail down the line. And then we will hold you responsible for it failing. Right? That will be the clear reason why it failed. So it's a very short-termism. Whereas you say, look, if you want this to be a good deal that you get and well implemented and beneficial in all sorts of directions for your company, never mind ours, then you need to get some of those stakeholders in so that we're doing a deal that's fit for purpose long term. Because when the deal is closed, that's not the end of the whole thing. Like they say, putting a deal to bed, closing the deal. Think about the words. It's like as if that's the end of it. No, that's the end of a phase. But having the mindset that, again, we have to collaborate and work together on this now. So we need to have those conversations.
That's something you talk a lot about, is collaboration. That seems to be the kind of the key takeaway for me here is just how important that is, thinking about it from that mindset. So I want to jump to some specific questions. I know that you talk about 3 foundational principles. Can you talk a little bit about what those are?
Well, there's a few things around that. The 3 foundational principles. These are kind of, how would you say, fundamentals that, regardless of the area, don't really change. So number 1 that I work with people, and this is maybe more relevant to the nice but nervous, is what I call think like a shrink. Now, I could say think like a coach or think like, a counselor or something like that, but it sounds good, makes you copy, think like a shrink. So you think, well, how does a shrink think? And it's this idea that even when a therapist is with a client and the client can be abusive and like, I come here and I pay you money and you're doing nothing for me, it can be abusive. The therapist is fully present, but not emotionally reactive. Not that they can't be emotional, but they're not emotionally reactive to the client. So it's a key principle in negotiation or any kind of conflict resolution. This is the same principles for difficult conversations within an organization, right? Even in a family. Now, we're not going to go into that sort of politics, but it's the similar principles that you need to be fully present, because if you're not, then you're not even listening to me, and that just angers people. So you're fully present, but emotionally non-reactive, which means you're in control. Now, that doesn't make you aggressive, but it doesn't make you on the defensive either. So people can say stuff and it can slide by you, and you're still there and you're leaning into it. So that's where you have those more difficult conversations, because you're allowing the space where it gains trust, because they can have an outburst, whether it's a tactic, a ploy, or genuine frustration, or whatever that might be, whether it's even anger. And you stay there, lean into it. That immediately creates a certain level of trust that, oh, wow, I can actually lose the plot with this person or get frustrated with this person, and they don't attack back. But they're also not being weak, right? They're still there in their strength, still fully present. It's a powerful thing. And when you can do that, then it allows the other person to go, oh, okay. And then they can either tell you why they're frustrated, or sometimes they'll even apologize. Well, sorry, that was out of order. Either way, there's a building of a relationship, a building of rapport there. People can lean into that space. So that's one very important principle, because often the natural reaction is, blah, blah, blah. Well, screw you. Well, you do that first. Really, a lot of people go on the attack, or, defense is the best form of attack. Oh, well, I didn't mean it in that way. And blah, blah, and you're excusing and on the back foot. Not good either. So as I said, think like a shrink. Very important.
So I like that, and I don't know if you can hear, but now I have a digger going outside my door. The joys going live. So the next thing you talk about is not a photo but a sculpture. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, that was just a metaphor, essentially, just like to think like a shrink. I mean, they're all metaphors, but it's a metaphor to help you remember that, well, how do you look at a photograph? So whether it's on a phone or on a printout, you turn the thing at an angle and it's the same image. Nothing changes. You can't see more, like, oh, I'm going to look behind that hedge. It doesn't work like that, right? So most people think of a deal as a transaction, as this 2D or even 1D flat object. And you need to remind yourself, it's a 3D object, like a sculpture that you see in real life. So what does a sculpture ask you to do that a photograph can't? Sculpture asks you to move around it. Either you move it or you move yourself around it, right? So that you can see new angles, you can see new perspectives, so you see it in a whole different understanding, right? And that's how you're meant to think of your deals, that it's not a 2D simple A to B transaction. That's walking into a store saying, I want to buy that, they hand it to you and you pay them. That's just pure simple transaction. Whereas when you're thinking of actually making an agreement, again, we're talking mostly as a negotiation, cross-table negotiation. Same principle when all sorts of forms of communication is that, now, don't get me wrong, sometimes you want just a transaction. You can't go into the Apple store to buy an Apple phone and negotiate with the guy. It's just like, no, the cost is the cost. Like, there's nothing we can do, right? They're there to do a transaction. That's fine. And that's also relevant for compromise. If you go to what would you call it, an antiques fair, and something costs, €20, and you say, would you take 10? And you meet at 15. That's fine, because you don't need to go into the interests and where people are coming from, because it doesn't matter. It's only a few euro. There's no great benefit. But if there's a relationship being formed, there's something larger at stake, that's where you want to go from compromise up to collaboration. But again, it's that idea of, think of it in terms of 3D, because when you think of it in terms of a sculpture, what else is possible here? What else am I not seeing by the way I'm currently looking at this?
Yeah, there's always other details there behind the scenes. There's always something else, and I think that's where you're talking about being accommodating. That there's so many other things that you can accommodate on if you look behind the scenes, and having clarity around your own needs.
Absolutely.
There may only be a couple of things that you really absolutely have to get, and then there's loads of options around. And that's what I like about negotiations. There's usually lots of things that you can negotiate on.
There's lots of other things in there that you don't even realize. But it's exactly that you're alluding to, which is always remember, there's a possibility that the other side can give you something even better than what you're asking for. Now, this is something, in that lovely book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, which has become quite famous lately. He's the FBI negotiator guy who then went into sort of the academic side and then into the business. And he actually writes some really good stuff. I do like his stuff. And that's worth a read. But one of the things he talks about is the amount of times in large negotiations that people are just so focused on the outcome that they want that they miss out on getting something better, which is weirdly easier for the other side to give sometimes because they're so outcome focused, which is great to be goal focused, but and how you get there. But remembering when you know the why, you know the purpose it's meant to serve, the need it's meant to address, if they offer you something better, what? Brilliant, go for it. All right.
What's the third of the three foundational principles that you talk about?
No is the beginning. So a lot of people, when they're having these difficult conversations, they'll ask for something, and the other side will go, "No, doesn't work for us," and they'll go, "Oh, okay," and they'll move on to the next thing. Now, again, if it's super minor, then that's fine because it doesn't really matter. Just like the trinket at the antiques fair or something like that, right? But if it does kind of matter, so to go, don't get mad, get curious, right? Or don't get sad and disappointed, get curious, right? So lean into it. So, well, that doesn't work for you. Oh, that's interesting. Would you mind, what is it about that doesn't quite fit for you? Oh, well, and then they'll explain their reasoning. So at the very least, you're getting an insight into what their needs really are and more nuance into what their needs, if you know kind of already. But also you're getting, this is about 20 or 30% of the time, you'll find that they've misunderstood something you've said, maybe because you weren't clear enough about it. And they think a situation isn't quite what it is. So they've said no because they have a misread of what you've said. So you can actually correct them and sometimes say, and have that thing then accepted. But at the very least, you get an insight into the reasoning behind them saying, no, that doesn't work for us. So no is the beginning. If they say yes, then yeah, super. But if they say no, then it's a new beginning of that of a new tangent on that conversation, rather than just saying this yes, this no. It's not just a checklist. It's a dynamic thing. We're trying to learn about the interests, the needs, the perspectives of our counterparts, so that we can help them get it. Because the more they get, the more they're likely to reciprocate in some way, shape, manner, or form. Right?
Okay, so I'm going to have to wrap this up soon because we've got about 10 minutes left, and I have some other questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
But I just want to see if I can summarize what you've been talking about. I think the big thing for me, the big takeaway is that as potential negotiators, we can be more accommodating. And there are probably things that we can accommodate that would be valuable to the other party that we don't know that it would be valuable to them. So we need to talk to them and figure that out, and approach it with a mindset of real collaboration. Um,
Yeah.
and then the what you were talking about, and I think that for me is the photo not a sculpture thing. Sorry, a sculpture not a photo. In that there's more aspects to the potential deal than are initially presented, and
And
there's a
just
lot more that we can negotiate on.
there's a lovely synopsis, but just to add to one of your points there, just to clarify, I'm not suggesting you're particularly weak or vulnerable either. Trust is built, rapport can be built in an instant. We've all gone and met people where we get along instantly. Like we just fit, we're on the same page, there's good energy. Other people less so, right? It takes time, and that's fine. That's rapport. Trust is built incrementally over time. One person saying they'll do something, they do it. Another person, then there's some level of reciprocation, however perceived, and that's built up. So it's not about just being weak and giving away the farm, and then somebody pulls the wool over you and you get nothing in return. That's not what I'm talking about with collaboration.
So that leads me to another question then.
Mhm.
Is can we negotiate successfully when there's no basis for trust yet?
Absolutely, because once you're starting to get into interests, and you're starting to actually find ways to feed the interests, the needs, if you like, of the other side, of your counterpart, then that's starting to build trust because you're feeling productive. You're feeling like you're building momentum rather than the
So
other side
so basically, a
stonewalling
good
you, you know?
negotiator is building trust as they go,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because they
which
say
goes back to the accommodating thing.
this is the irony of seeing it like a game, but not actually playing games. There's a difference. One is the gameful mindset, and the other, like, Djokovic or whoever, or Lionel Messi is playing a game, but they're not playing games. They're very serious about what they do, right? So they're fully focused, they're fully involved, their whole life is aimed at performing well in this scenario. But they're also aware that, as you see Messi smile sometimes, it's still only a game, right? It's not life or death here, okay? But it's that level of focus, that absolute, fully present. So many things built up to this thing. They're fully prepared. And when they're in it, they're fully ready to be dynamic, right? Because they know what they're
Yeah,
about, they know what they need.
they've pre-planned a lot of their moves. They've set up the muscle memory,
Yeah,
and they're able to make intelligent decisions when their heartbeat is 140. And
exactly.
I think that's similar to what you're talking about. Getting, for me, thinking of it as taking a step back, a layer of abstraction, back from the current situation, and being able to kind of look at the whole thing, and then
Mm,
having this idea of it as 3D, because there's a lot more there behind the scenes that potentially we could be accommodating on. I
true.
like that.
True,
So,
and just to
go
raise
ahead.
that point there, this is also bringing into that next level when you know where you're coming from, exactly what you need. You know your margins on things, like if you're selling different products or whatever services, like, oh, well, that seems to be a good margin, but it actually has a lot of maintenance costs. So you know exactly where you can be super flexible and where there's very little room for that. That gives you power. So when the other side is asking for certain things, you can say, no, we can't do that. However, we can do something on that side. It allows that flexibility and agility. But just to continue the sporting analogy, the greats are super prepared, but they're also able to read the field in whatever area it is, whether it's business, whether it's stocks, whether it's tech, whether it's sport. The greats in each domain are able to anticipate where things are going to go. And
Yeah.
like, think about it. If you're very prepared and with more experience, then you're able to actually have a lower cognitive load, i.e., there's less on your mind. So you're able to see the nuances because you're better prepared. You're able to see the nuances because you're able to reflect more fully on previous wins and losses, gains and issues that were in the past.
So I just checked the chat. So we've had some comments in on both
Hmm.
YouTube and LinkedIn. So hello Celeste, Joe.
Hi, Celeste. Joe, Mr.
So
Jacoby. Good to see you.
yeah. So the name of the book, it's not out yet, but it's going to be called The Psychological Edge of Negotiation for Business Owners. When are you going to be publishing that, Al? Just put you
I'm
on the
going to be
spot.
publishing that probably at the start of March, round about
Right.
St. Patrick's Day. Actually, we're just before St. Patrick's Day. Seems to be the current deadline. Yeah. So
So I'll put in the chat or in the comments under this. I'll put in the I'll put in links to Al's socials, and
please do. Yeah.
follow Al on the socials, and we'll make sure that it gets.
Particularly LinkedIn. I'm often on LinkedIn quite a bit, so always feel free to reach out to me there. Do say hello, and if you're interested
Cool.
in a copy of the book, yeah, definitely, more than happy to send it
So,
on to you.
so the other thing is, somebody mentioned, Celeste mentioned that the sound is echoing. So, I don't know. I'm going to give this a listen back afterwards. This is the first time actually broadcasting an interview live. So, I got to see if there's problems there, that if there's anything we can do about that. And thank you for putting up with that since you're still listening. Okay, Al, I want to wrap this up. I have some questions that I always ask. I ask these questions.
Hmm.
What is the number one tip that you would give to somebody who wants to build their authority?
Who wants to build their authority? That's an interesting question. I think you know why you're building it. That's the big one. As I was saying, it's the first thing, and it's so fundamental because people so often overlook it. Of course, I know why. And you go, well, why do you want this thing? And then they go, oh, well, I don't know. Like, is it just ego reasons? You know, is it to show someone, look, I am great, or is it actually for more profound reasons? Is you know, it's this idea of it needs to be an intrinsic motivator, i.e., you need to be internally motivated, which is what basically the word is inspired. Like again, so much research on performance, and Joe Jacoby there knows far more about this than I do, but so much high performance comes from intrinsic rather than extrinsic motivation. So again, if you want to be an authority, that's a bit of a slog. You're going to have to work at that. Now, everybody knows that. Nobody's delusional enough to think they're going to be an authority tomorrow. But if you can get the real reason, the real purpose, that fire in the belly as to why you want to be an authority, to serve, to get, you know, your approach, your perspective, your methodology, your way to help not 2 people, but maybe 2,000 people or 200,000 people, whatever your goal is, that's fine as a destination. But the fuel to get there, and that's what makes all that content, you know, creating that content, whether it's videos, whether it's podcasts, whether it's blog articles, all the ways that Alistair talks about building that authority, the will to do that in that process, getting that right process is by knowing your why, is having a really clear grasp of it. And by the way, that why isn't an intellectual exercise. Yes, you want to think about it, but it's the emotional resonance literally in your gut. That's why we talk fire in the belly. That's what is inspiring, because when you're inspired, it's easier to inspire others. That's how you win over people. By your interest, by your focus, by your determination, by your, this is a great thing to do. This is a great perspective to take. That's how you become an authority.
I love it, and I do. I think it's really important for pretty much any goal is to understand the purpose behind it, the reasoning behind it.
Oh, why
That
is
will help
everything?
you
Why is
to
everything?
achieve your goal, no matter what that goal
Absolutely.
is, personal, business, no matter what you're doing. Okay, I need to wrap this up. I want to ask you briefly: is there a business mistake or failure that you can tell us about that you've experienced?
Only one. You know, I've made a lot. I think it was. I think it was going into projects that didn't really suit me. So again, probably related to that why question. That's what comes to mind. It's going into business projects and spending too long in them, trying to dig them out. When, and there was something to be said for that perseverance. You know, full credit to me for that. But it's one of those things where you should have probably stopped earlier, knowing
So
when to
fail
quit.
faster.
Fail faster, absolutely. But again, it's when you're clear on the reasons for doing it, and then asking yourself, look, what else with my time and energies could serve me better? I think that's probably one of the key things I'd say to you on that.
Yeah. Um, okay. Is there a business book or resource that you would recommend or that's been important for you?
There is, and it's probably a bit different to what you might expect. I did mention, you know, Chris Foss's Never Split the Difference. That's a lovely overview of basically some of the more psychological aspects playing into negotiation, and he's talking about an awful lot of stuff since the last 10, 20 years where psychologists have gotten involved in it, because originally it was lawyers, then it was economists in the theory of negotiation, and then with his stuff he's talking much more about more practical stuff, again about rapport, relationship, communication. It's all my stuff. So when I read his stuff, I was thinking, yeah, I like it. I mean, I have different angles on certain things, but I do like it. So that's one book. The real book that I always recommend, because this is the one that I think blew me away most, is a book called Redirect: The Surprising New Science of Psychological Change. And that's by Timothy Wilson. And Redirect is literally that any therapy that works, whatever school of therapy or whatever it is, or people just fixing themselves, it's due to people being aware of and then changing their internal story. So it's basically narrative psychology. And this plays into every area of your life, every area of your interactions with yourself, with others, with your family, and then also in business. Because it's absolutely key, the stories people are telling themselves. And when you can tap into that story, you can help redirect that story to something maybe more positive, more productive, more constructive. Because as I said, it's only when people change their story that they stay changed. Otherwise, people revert back, which is no good, because
Yeah,
then the
that makes
story
sense.
hasn't
That makes
changed.
sense.
So
So,
hugely
Al, what
valuable.
about fiction? I know you read a lot of non-fiction business books. Do you read much fiction?
I read the occasional fiction. I always feel I'm too indulgent of myself. I should be reading something to do with business or negotiation or psychology or neurology or something. Yeah. So I do read a bit of fiction. Um, Again, it's fiction where you get to have a walk around in someone else's perspective, which I find most valuable. Because then you're literally learning a life of insight from someone else's perspective. And again, that's hugely valuable because that's what being able to communicate with someone else is all about. Is this idea that you have to truly, not just intellectually realize someone is different to you, it's truly emotionally realizing that they have fundamentally different experiences and perspectives than you do, and being able to work with that, engage with that, and build with that.
I love it. That's very deep, Al. Very deep. But we have to wrap.
We do.
Thank you so much for coming on. Um, I want to get you to share where people can find you in a moment. I just want to say thanks to everybody who is watching on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Um, and you're saying the echo is not a massive problem, but yeah, you still can hear it. So we will try and sort that out, and we'll definitely sort it out for the next time. There will be a recording of this available. It will go up on the Recognized Authority podcast as an audio only episode, if the audio is good enough. And it will be available on the Recognized Authority YouTube channel and hopefully on LinkedIn as well. I think it'll save it there. Um,
Super. No,
so
that's
if you
great.
if you
Thanks so
follow
much.
either of us, we'll be posting to it. So,
Absolutely.
Al, where can people find you if they want to learn more, if they want to check out and get reminders about the book when it comes out?
Yeah. Well, to keep it simple, just go to almcbride.com, ALMCBRIDE.com, and you can see what I'm at there. There's a few resources there if you're interested in. There's a short email course, just you get an email every day for a week or two. That people have found that valuable. But the other place where I hang out most probably is LinkedIn. So it's just LinkedIn/ Alistair McBride, and that's ALISTAIR. Unlike our bit different to our host, just be careful of that. McBride, MCBRIDE. So Alistair McBride, or you can find me through Alistair McDermott there as well, I'm sure. But
Cool.
yeah,
And I just put that on the bottom of the screen. You can see almcbride.com for his.
super duper. Thanks for that.
So, Al, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great to chat.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And
And thank
cheers,
you
everyone, for the
everybody who
comments.
has tuned in.
Awesome stuff. Have a great day.
And this is, if you're listening to this on the Recognized Authority podcast, thank you for listening. And you can also view the video of this if you go and check out the YouTube channel. The links will be in the show notes and on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.